Hey, it's Mike with Riding in the Ozarks, and today we're doing the 5,000 mile service on my 2024 Street Glide. Now, I made myself a little cheat sheet. I copied this out of the service manual, and this is just the things I need to do for the 5,000 miles. I'll throw this up on the screen here. There's a couple other things I left in there because you do them periodically, like once a year. I've already had a 1,000 mile service this year, so those things I won't be doing. We'll be focusing on basically the principal stuff you do for a 5,000 mile service for anybody that's never done one. Now, I will say some people do a 3-hole oil change every 5,000 miles. This bike is new. I am not going to do that this time. If the bike had a lot higher mileage, like my 2016 Street Glide with 75,000 miles on it, then I probably would, because I would be looking for signs of where materials coming out in the oil on the magnetic drain plug, things like that. This bike is under warranty. I'm going to not worry about it. I'm going to follow the manufacturer's intervals and guidelines on what to do for a 5,000 mile service because of that. Now, as you can see, I do have a table lift in the shop, but I'll not be using that today. Part of the reason is we're going to check the wheels and the wheel bearings and things like that. So I'm going to be using my Let's Roll dolly and lift system because it allows me to get the bike up and have both wheels off the ground at the same time, yet being very stable. So I can spin those wheels, check those. We'll also be checking the belt deflection, which we'll need to be able to spin the rear wheel for. So I'm going to use that system for this particular service. Now, one of the first things you need to do is start the bike and let it run. Let the oil warm up. It'll make it easier to drain out the drain plug. All right, here's the tools we need today. That's a 5/8. That's for taking the drain plug out. This is for taking the air cleaner apart. We will be cleaning and recharging that. Checking our brake fluid. This is a moisture checker to see if you have too much moisture content in your brake fluid. I'm sure I don't because it's new. This is what I'm using for a drain pan because it's cheap and it fits between the rails on my Let's Roll dolly and lift system. Coolant in case we need it. Air filter oil and cleaner. Harley Davidson oil and oil filter. Now, I normally use this K&N. I love the K&Ns, and I'll show you why. But because the bike is under warranty, I'm going to use the Harley Davidson oil filter this time. But it is smooth on top here. The reason I like the K&N is they have this little nut on the top that you can just put a socket on to tighten and loosen that. I've had to tear a lot of oil filters off of bikes that were over-tightened. That makes the job a lot easier if that's what happens. So I recommend that for most everybody. But because we're under warranty, we're going to be nice and use the Harley Davidson stuff. Now, while the engine's still hot, we're going to get that oil draining out, and then I'll work on checking the wheels and some of the other stuff. All right, now this drain plug, if you didn't know, is magnetic. You should check it for materials. What I usually do is wipe it on a paper towel. Looks pretty clean. And then I rub my finger on the paper towel to see if I feel any metal in there, anything that's hard. And I don't, so that's a good sign. Now, the owner's manual calls for checking the tread on the front tire. So I'm going to do that, but I'm also, while I'm doing this, pay attention to the wheel bearing. Feel the wheel as I rotate it, make sure I don't feel any clunkiness. Now, I'm going to start with the valve stem down. That way I can tell when I've made a full circle. I'm going to check the wheel on this side, and then I'll do it again on the other side. And I'm paying attention to the tire tread as I go. One full circle. All right, guys, another thing is to make sure your wheel weights are on the wheel when you're inspecting that. I know the book doesn't say that, but I've seen wheel weights come off and the tire be out of balance and people get wobbles and they're trying to figure out why. So just kind of double check that also. Now, my very unprofessional opinion is I would not check brake fluid levels at 5,000 miles. I mean, I might check the glass to make sure it looks okay, but I wouldn't check it for moisture content. I'm going to do it because the guide says to, but the fact is, the more you open and close this, the more you expose the fluid to moisture in the air. So I normally would not do it on a bike like this. I would check my brake fluid moisture level once a year. I would check the window every time, and if it needed fluid, then I would add it. Otherwise, I would leave it alone. But the guide calls for it, and we're going to try and be good and do everything that you're supposed to do for a 5,000 mile service, since the bike is under warranty. Be very careful not to get brake fluid on your painted surfaces. Here's our little tester. Little lights are up here. The higher the light goes, the worse off we are. We're at 0%, green light, we're all good. You should inspect things like the fuel lines, brake lines, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to look at those. I have something I want to show you that I did see when I was inspecting this already. We're also supposed to clean the oil cooler radiator area. Now, I just put a painted factory part on here a week ago, so I had it off, and I cleaned it then the best I could, flushed it out with some water. Here's where your fuel line connects. You want to check and make sure it's not wet, anything like that. These are like the hoses that run the coolant into the heads. Nothing looks wet or seepy around that. Down here's our brake line fittings. Everything look okay there. No signs of leakage. Same thing over here. Here's coolant hose going up in there. Everything looks okay. You guys see that little nick in the cable there? I have 12-inch bars. This cable's been replaced, and we noticed this was nicked at the 1,000 mile service, and they replaced it, but it's nicked again. So I'm going to show you what's causing that and what I'm going to do about it. This little bolt is hitting that cable right there when I do a full hard right turn and I lock. So once I've turned all the way, I'll show you. That's when it happens. So I'm gonna put a little zip tie in here and kind of pull this up a little higher, and that should keep that away from that. I'm also gonna wrap it with some black electrical tape for now to seal it and keep any moisture out of that. Probably something I'm gonna have to replace in the future. But if you've done aftermarket bars, I highly suggest you check that cable and that location. There's my fix. Now, I have ran this zip tie back to the gas tank mounting bolt, so it's not pulling on other cables, it's pulling on something that's fixed, and it's not real tight. You can see here we have flex. I've already turned the forks both ways, make sure it's not going to hit. It's now above where that little bolt would catch it. It's not too tight. It's not pulling on the cable as I turn it, anything like that. And we're checking the wheel, starting with the valve stem all the way at the bottom. Now, I don't know if you guys can hear that, but no rubbing there. Very quiet. There, little rubbing. Little scraping sound. Now, I don't know if that's a brake rotor, maybe not being absolutely straight, and it's rubbing on the brake pad at a certain point. There it gets tighter. There it's quit. We'll see if it still does it after we adjust the brake deflection. It could be that the belt has gotten tightened up. It's too tight. Checking our tread, our wheel. Don't see any damage to the wheel. We'll go around and check the other side. You're supposed to check these exhaust bolts, exhaust hanger bolts, things like that. Make sure they're tight. You haven't had any rattle out, that kind of stuff. Mine are all here. They all look good. There's no rattle in this anywhere. We're not missing any nuts. Nothing's come loose. Got a clamp here. Got a couple more over here. Make sure all that stuff looks good. Feels tight. Didn't lose any nuts. We're supposed to check that sprocket and belt. So we're going to run that past here. Make sure we're not missing any teeth. Don't have any chips in the sprocket, anything like that that would cause us a problem with the belt drive later. You could mark this with the white crayon and run it till it comes back if you want, but I usually just roll the wheel a couple of times. It's pretty easy to spot if you've got a chewed up belt. I have broke one once. It did have over 80,000 miles on it when it went, and it was probably 25 years old. We'll check the belt tension or deflection here in a minute. I have a little tool for that, but you need it down on the ground to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and put the drain plug back in with the fresh O-ring on it, change the oil filter, and then put the bike back down because I don't think there's anything else I need to do with it up on the lift. Oh, got to check the rear brake fluid. It's the same as the front. Let me show you where the master cylinder is. There is the master cylinder for the rear brake. So we need to check fluid on that. I'll do that also. And then we'll clean and recharge this air filter. You're supposed to check and inspect the switches and cables and everything else. Like I said, this was just done at 1,000-mile service, but I know they're good. I also have some cable lube if I need it for the clutch cable, which is a mechanical cable. One of the things you're supposed to do is adjust your play and your clutch lever. I do not have much. I have it where I want it. I recently adjusted this. Now I have 12-inch bars on here, and I think they changed out the factory cable when they installed these. So right there is a black cover. You slide that up and there's 2 nuts on there, and that's what you use to adjust your clutch to take that slack out of your lever if you need to. If you have this style cable, I think some of the new ones come with this auto adjusting cable. I don't like that. It's on my wife's Sport Glide, not my favorite thing. There is the nut and the bolt that you use to adjust the clutch on this style. I pulled that slide up to show it to you. Again, I don't need to adjust it. I just did it about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago because I wanted to take some of the play out. It seemed like it'd gotten a little more play as I got more miles on the bike. This is 14 to 21 foot-pounds of torque. I've already set this to 17 and a half. There we are. So if you didn't know, the oil filter is right there in front of the front cylinder, down low. I have this special drain piece I've used in the past that drains the oil that comes out of the filter down into a pan that I have down here below. You can use a hose to get it down into there if you want, or just let it drip off the end. But because of where the horn is at on these new models, this is uphill instead of downhill, so I don't know if this is going to work very well, but that might be a really good reason to relocate the horn. I've seen people do that. In fact, I was talking to the guys at V-Twin Visionary at East Meets West, and they relocated it back here. They put it back there behind the rear cylinder. Now, somebody's going to say, what's that? I'm going to do a video on it, but that is my battery tender plug right there. It's mounted on the inside of this mid-frame deflector here. So it's out of sight, really easy to get to. And if you guys want, I'll hurry up and do a video on that because I know people are going to ask now if they've seen it. All right, I've got it out. And, you know, what little oil gets in there is dripping down into my pan. The one issue I ran into is because I have this Coolant anodized radiator reservoir protector or cover, which makes this plastic thing look a lot better. I had to pop it out of the holder there to get the bottom in to make clearance to get the filter out. But I didn't have to take it off. It's not a big deal. This thing just pops back in, but I'll wait till I get the new filter in there. Now, it's really important to look and make sure the ring, the gasket, did not stick to the housing in there. Make sure it is still on the old oil filter, which we can see there that it is. I prime my oil filters. Some people don't, but that means pouring a little oil in there. Don't fill this thing all the way up because you're just going to spill it when you're putting it on. But, you know, I usually a third. And then you'll always get a little oil on the top. Make sure you dab that on there and run your finger around the gasket after you dab it in the oil. It'll help that seal up better. So that's just how my dad taught me. That's how I do it. Some older service manuals actually say to do it that way. I've seen some that do not say it. I do hand tight and then just a snug over. When I say snug, I mean like 1/8 of a turn. So we're going to put the wrench on there, put it back in there, and turn it just a hair. So here I am at top dead center. 1/8 of a turn. That's it. Not even 1/4 of a turn. Please stop over tightening these. Now I'm putting in the Sin 3 20 weight 50. I believe they have a new oil out that they're advertising. This is what I bought. Now, I've seen dealers advertise $99 specials for an oil change on Saturdays. Now, that's just an oil change. They're not inspecting everything else, but you can inspect the rest of this pretty much by yourself, other than the air cleaner clean, and it doesn't cost you anything. I got about $100 of materials between the oil filter and the oil using the synthetic. So if you can find somebody doing $100 oil changes with synthetic, it's probably well worth the money to just let them do it. And then you do the rest of the inspection yourself. I personally like to do my own service. So I have a shop, I already have the tools, so that makes it easy for me. The initial fill is supposed to be 4 quarts, which is what this jug is. I have another quart in case I need to add any at any point, but we're going to go ahead and put all 4 quarts of this in. I also use this to put a little bit of primer in the oil filter. If anybody's wondering why I chose the Sin 3, it's because it is supposed to keep the engine a little cooler. This is already a liquid cooled engine, but I really want to see how the heat is this year compared to my 2016 twin cam. So far, I rode it in some 90-degree days, and it was good. I mean, definitely cooler. I can tell a difference with the center cooled heads. So we're going to stay with the synthetic oil that I'm running in there, help try and keep the engine cooler, and see how this thing does this summer in the real heat. I took my Coolant reservoir cover off because I want you guys to see how to check your antifreeze coolant level. By the way, it's way too expensive for a little jug. $22 from Harley Davidson for a little bitty jug, not even a gallon. You should be able to buy a jug that size for $5, boys. Come on, that's just, I mean, I'm still feeling it in my ass. You can see it move around. I'm just showing you that's not like discoloration in the plastic. That is where the coolant is. So we're above the cold. I'm not going to add anything to it. So that's how the reservoir looks setting in there with the factory configuration. I'm going to show you what it looks like after I put my Coolant cover over it. I just kind of don't like the whole, you can see the fittings and the hoses down here and stuff. And that's great for inspection. But, you know, you can see the cap up here. It's easy to get to this way, but I just don't like the look of it. So I'll show you what I did. All right, there's the Coolant reservoir cover installed. You can't see the fittings in there. It just looks all a lot cleaner down there now. Now I'm running the Wedge air cleaner. I do have the Screaming Eagle tuner on this Tab Performance slip-on, so I'm technically a stage 1, but it hasn't been dyno tuned yet. There's 3 bolts holding this Wedge air cleaner on. We're gonna get this off, get it flushed, and let it dry while I check the belt deflection, and then I'll oil it up and put this back together, and we should be close to done. I like to wipe off the excess oil, if there is any, before I get started. We're basically gonna spray this with cleaner and then flush it from the inside out. The dirt should be trapped in the outside of this, so we'll run water on the inside to flush that out after we've soaked it with cleaner. That's what the other pan here is for. And I can tell by looking at it that this front side here definitely has stuff in it. There's some little buggies. This is K&N's power cleaner. Now, you're supposed to let that soak for about 10 minutes. Do not let it dry on the filter, and then flush it with water and let it air dry. So we'll be right back after it's soaked, and we'll go rinse it out. Then we're gonna let it air dry and check the belt deflection. So you can see the stuff that's in there a lot better now. Now it's a lot cleaner. That's what it should look like. We'll let it air dry. This is a belt tensioner guide. The part with the L here on the end is going to go against the belt. Down here we have a little O-ring that is set at 10 pounds. And we press in on this plunger till it bottoms out at the O-ring at the bottom of it. That means 10 pounds of pressure. This is where we measure our deflection. Each of these gradients is a 1/16. I should be between 1/4 and 7/16. So that's the second one from the bottom one and the second one from the top one. That is in between where we should get when we get to 10 pounds. Now, this belt feels really tight to me. You should check this with it in neutral, on the ground with weight on it, but nobody on the bike, either upright or on the jiffy stand. We're only getting to the first mark. Now, this isn't a how-to exactly, but just to give you a rough idea, if you're gonna have to fix that deflection in the belt, you gotta pull the mufflers, get to the rear axle nut. I'm gonna loosen that up, and then we're gonna take some of the pressure off the belt, and then we're gonna rotate it 1/4 and check the deflection at every 1/4 of a turn of the wheel. We don't want it to ever be tighter than that 1/4, but not looser than that 7/16. So I'm gonna go through that process, but one thing you ought to do is mark those cams. So that's like the top and bottom, so I can tell how much I'm changing it and make sure it's the same on both sides. I've done that before. I've broke anything loose or done anything different. Now I marked this one, but I just adjusted it. This side is where the cam is welded to the nut. So when you turn this, you're turning that cam. The other side, you want it to be the same. If it doesn't change, you need to adjust it so that you keep it even. I marked both of these before I started. Here's the side with the nut that I loosened, and you can see the cam didn't turn. So I have that cam about the middle for the top line there. You can see that. We're just a little past that here, so I need to bring this one up. This belt's a lot looser. I saw it loosen way up when I turned that. Top line's about the middle. Top line's about the middle. Let's rotate it and check some deflection. Much better. We're up above the second mark at least. I measured this with the valve stem at the bottom so I can keep track of my 1/4 turns. I'm gonna rotate this 1/4 of a turn. We'll check it again. Much better. There's half. Much better. There's 3/4. Much better. Now we're going to tighten this all back up and put the mufflers back on. I might clean the exhaust while I have it off. All right, as you can see, the filter's got a nice red tint to it again. That's from the oil. I thought about getting a different color, but the red does help you tell when it needs to be re-oiled. So when it's getting really dirty. So she's all cleaned out. Let's get her mounted back up. And this is pretty much the end of the 5,000 mile service. I've done everything else, or from riding the bike, I know how everything else is. So I don't need to check the electrical switches. I know they're all working, you know, stuff like that. Some of this is, you know, I guess maybe if you didn't ride your bike daily, or somebody else is doing the service on your bike that doesn't ride it and know these things, might need to check them. Probably the most important thing is to, you know, keep an eye on your tires, inspect your tires and your bearings and your wheels, that belt deflection, clean your air cleaner, change your oil. Make sure your brake fluid levels are where they need to be, but I wouldn't necessarily open them up and check them for moisture at just 5,000 miles unless you have a reason to be concerned. Y'all stay safe, keep on riding. We'll see you in the next one.